everyone. We are back for another episode of our podcast with the North Carolina History Focus. We have another special guest here for you tonight, so we're so excited to make our introductions and get started. So I'm going to turn it over to Beth from here.
Yes, I am so excited to be able to welcome tonight Professor William S. Caudill. He likes to be called Bill, I believe, but Bill is a native of Waxhaw, North Carolina. He is descended from both Highland Scots and Ulster Scots families who settled in the Carolina Sandhills and Piedmont regions, respectively. He was an avid history buff from a very young age, and this, combined with an interest in music, led him to take up the Scottish bagpipe at the age of 9. Can you believe that?
Wow.
He has pursued the bagpipe to great success in becoming one of the few Southern-born players of the 20th century to reach the professional level of playing and competition. He graduated from St. Andrew's Presbyterian College with a BA degree with honors in history in 1989. His undergraduate honors thesis dealt with the historical use of Scottish Gaelic in the Highland settlements of the Carolinas. He also completed graduate studies in folklore at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, receiving the MA degree in folklore and history in American Studies. His MA thesis dealt with the history and associated oral traditions relative to the Highland immigration to North Carolina, which occurred in Scotland. This occurred in Scotland, Robeson, Richmond, and Moore counties in 1884, and involved research and oral field work both in North Carolina and Skye in Scotland. He has given lectures and other presentations for countless historical and genealogical societies throughout the Carolinas, and has also presented lectures on the history of Scottish settlements in the Carolinas and the cultural retentions of Highland Scots in the Carolinas at the University of Glasgow in Scotland, the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, the North Carolina Museum of History in Raleigh, as well as at a symposium of Scottish Gaelic culture in North America sponsored by Harvard University in honor of their late chair of Celtic Studies, Dr. Charles W. Dunn. Bill is also the founder of the Scottish Heritage Center and the Pipe Band at St. Andrews University, formerly St. Andrews Presbyterian College, where he was hired after graduation in 1989 to launch the program. Since that time, the Scottish Heritage Center has become a clearinghouse of information for those researching the experience of the Scots in North Carolina or in the Carolinas. He is also the founder of the Scotland County Highland Games, which began in 2009 and have since grown to become the largest single tourist draw or attraction to Scotland County annually since that time. Through his leadership and the support and assistance of dozens of volunteers from Scotland County and the surrounding region, this event has grown to become one of the most popular Scottish events offered in the southeastern United States, yet retaining the charm and authenticity of Highland gatherings held in small communities in Scotland. Bill, we'd like to welcome you. We are so honored. I mean, reading over that, we've got a real expert with us tonight, and we're so pleased to have you.
Well, thanks so much for the invitation, Beth. I appreciate it. Beth and Carolyn both. Yeah. Glad to be with you.
And we see you're in your office right now, right?
I am in my office here. Yes, absolutely, I am. This is Scottish Heritage Central here in North Carolina or Southeast, something like that. I guess if one could be a professional Scot, I guess I'm probably the closest thing to it outside of our stars of Outlander there. So
that's right.
Very cool.
We've got a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah.
We probably are not going to cover it all in this first part. So we're going to get started. And what we don't finish tonight, if we don't finish it, we'll just move on with a part 2, maybe next week or the week after.
Okay.
So Carolyn, I'll let you start out tonight.
Okay, sure. Glad to. So the first question we have for you, Bill, is when was the earliest mass immigration of Scots to North Carolina? Actually, when and why?
Okay, well, when you talk of Scots, we're talking of a very broad term there, because up until recent times, and perhaps even the coming and popularity of Outlander and Braveheart and Rob Roy and things like that, this term Scotch-Irish was one that we heard all the time here in the Carolinas, and certainly in the Piedmont. Oh, I'm Scotch-Irish. I'm a Presbyterian. Even people in the Sandhills would say I'm Scotch-Irish, and there's a difference between the Scots-Irish, or as a lot of academics might say, the Ulster Scots, and Highland Scots. Now, I'm going to be dealing primarily with the story and the history of the Highland Scots, but let's first talk about that other group. Well, actually, we might say that there's 3 groups, because we can also talk about the Lowland Scots as well, who are oftentimes sort of a completely overlooked group there. You've got the romantic identity and personalities of the Ulster Scot, which materialized in people like, say, Andrew Jackson, Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone, that sort of person. Then you got the image of the Highland Scot, the kilt-wearing, bagpipe-playing, Gaelic-speaking Highlander. And then you've got the Lowland Scot, who oftentimes just blended in because they weren't that culturally dissimilar to other ethnic groups from Britain, the Welsh, the English, let's say. But let's talk first for a moment about the Ulster Scots. Ulster Scot migrations really started in mass around the 1720s, and a lot of that had to do with some of the very same things that were going on in Scotland in terms of the raising of rents, economic conditions, and particularly in Ulster, the sort of collapse, the failure of the linen industry. So that caused a lot of these people who were living in Ulster to consider relocating to the New World and different opportunities. Now, those people that were in Ulster, they were primarily people who had come from the lowland area of Scotland, let's say south of the line that runs between Edinburgh and Glasgow, the lowlands, the border areas there, and northern England. We know that there were some small groups of Highland Scots that were involved in these migrations as well, groups of people that were known as the Redshanks. They're actually mercenaries, warriors that were brought in to sort of serve as a buffer against the somewhat hostile Catholic Irish. And we look at that colony in Ulster as being planted roughly around the time of Queen Elizabeth, and the time of the Spanish Armada and things like that. So that gives you a time frame for that, 1720s. And there's a 1720s through the 1750s, actually up until almost the eve of the Revolutionary War. You had these people, Scots, Ulster Scots. They weren't intermarried with the Catholic or native Irish. They kept themselves, who migrated. The primary port of entry for the Ulster Scots was Philadelphia. You had other folks coming in, of course, to Boston and New York, and also some groups coming in at Charleston, particularly late, say around 1770. But those people, let's take Philadelphia as the primary port of entry. And you'd have a first generation, a great number of which might be indentures. There's a huge amount of indentures that came out. These weren't people that owned, were selling homes and things like that to come out. These were poor people looking for new opportunity. Indenture was a great way to pay your passage and get across the Atlantic. So you might have a first generation, lands in Philadelphia, is indentured to someone in the region around Philadelphia, learns a trade, serves their indenture, has been able to save some money. They go out, further west in Pennsylvania. They buy their own plot, they practice their trade. Maybe a following generation starts out migrating. You can't go west because you're starting to run into Indian frontier and you got the Appalachian chain in the way. So they come south, down the Appalachian chain, down the Blue Ridge, sort of a second wave point of stop, let's say, would be, let's say the area around Stanton, Virginia. A lot of early 18th century Presbyterian churches and groups in that area. And you can find not only there, but also in South Central Pennsylvania, a lot of Ulster place names and Irish place names, which sort of denote the fact that those people were there. Next generation, by the 1750s, you got these people coming into North Carolina, coming in through the gaps into our Piedmont, coming down to the Salisbury, Charlotte area, the Rowan County, Mecklenburg County, present-day Union, and also across, well, just down really into the whole Catawba Valley. You know, a lot of times people said the area between the PD River and the Catawba River was the Scots-Irish Mesopotamia. You know, so and it really is to a great degree. And then maybe joined in to sort of finish up the tailbone of this spine that we've got running along the Appalachian chain. Groups of people who'd come into Charleston. So you sort of got this background of people who are sort of really out there on the frontier. And that's, of course, the people that we have that are the people that cleared the land and hardy Presbyterians, became ardent patriots during the Revolutionary War. Right, that's the Ulster Scots. The Highland Scots. Highland Scots different from those people, not only geographically, but linguistically and culturally as well, because they're looking at the people that were of the Gaelic culture that come out of this warrior-based culture of clanship and primogeniture and the passing of feudal titles from chief to first son, you know, that sort of thing, which was really not eliminated until the time of the 45 in most places in Scotland. So a very different organization of society there, a different way of life, and culturally and linguistically different people. All right. There were three main settlements of Highland Scots on the eastern seaboard, which occurred at roughly the same time. We've got the coming of the first organized party of Highland people here in North Carolina, which came in the fall of 1739. It was the now famed Argyll colony. About 350 that came in. That was really sort of an entrepreneurial venture by some prominent tacksmen, that is the seconds to the landlords, the lieutenants of the landlords, particularly from the Kintyre Peninsula, the islands of Islay and Jura, in that part of Argyll, that came in with the first beachhead settlement. 1739. Now, around 1738 to 1740, James Oglethorpe in Georgia has also recruited Highlanders to be part of his new Georgia colony. And he recruited Highlanders particularly from the area around Inverness, Inverness-shire. A lot of the people that were recruited for that venture not only were, again, this sort of warrior type, but a good many of those folks had some experience in forestry. We know that because there was forestry, timber business going on in that area. And so they were sort of brought over not only to serve as a military colony, but perhaps to start investing and creating this industry in Georgia. All right. We also have around 1738, 1739, the establishment of what's called the Argyll Patent in upstate New York. And this was a group of people that came from, again, the county of Argyll in the Southwest Highlands, many of whom share the same surnames. And I'm sure there was some interrelationship between some of these people that were recruited by Governor William Tryon into upstate New York to again serve as sort of a frontier settlement, again with strategic importance, because it was a buffer against the unfriendly native populations that were still very present there. In the South, The area around Darien and Point South were a military colony. They were buffers against not only the Spanish in Florida, but the hostile native populations as well. So North Carolina's settlement, which was encouraged by Governor Gabriel Johnson, really did not have that strategic responsibility. Johnson was looking to simply populate the inland areas, the frontier, which at that point was pretty much anything from 50 miles inland from Wilmington or the coast. And so that is the primary reason why this settlement thrived. It was fed on with later comers through the push and pull of immigration, economic and political changes in the Highlands following the 1745 Jacobite Rebellion, not immediately following. And that's a big misnomer there. A lot of people think that there are people running through the Highlands after the defeat at Culloden, and they're jumping right on immigrant ships to get away. And that simply did not happen. There's no documentation for that whatsoever, but a huge romantic theme that was played upon by 19th century historians and writers. And so you get this romantic image of the Highlander fleeing through the heather, jumping on the ship, sailing to Carolina, and off to his better fortune. And that simply did not happen. It was the aftermath, the changes in agriculture, the fencing in of land for the first time in the Highlands, which had never happened before, the pressures against traditional culture, which were placed by the occupying British forces, the pressure toward education and a conversion from traditional Gaelic society to an Anglophone society by groups such as the Society in Scotland for the Propagation of Christian Knowledge, which are the ones that established English-speaking schools, and kids that were caught teaching, speaking Gaelic, you're pop, on the hand, that sort of thing. So a lot of those pressures, you've got people that almost a generation before have gotten very favorable terms by the governor, large land grants, and you got this push and pull. You've got the pull by people, word of Carolina. There were brochures and pamphlets which were printed talking about the promise of Carolina. Scotus Americanus, the one that has the anonymous author, we think, from the island of Isla, who published a great brochure about the advantages of Carolina to recruit people. So that push and pull really picked up again following the British dominance in the 7 Years' War, and the seven, as we would call it, the 7 years, or the French and Indian War here, the pushing further back of Indian frontiers, things like that, which really established that final British dominance here. And so you've got cousins across the sea who made it good a number of years ago. So why don't we try it there? You still got great encouragement from the colonial governors. And again, that push and pull taking place. Your rents rising, a lot of famine years. We think of, like the Irish potato famines of the 1840s. Well, there are very similar and equal, perhaps, famine years which occurred in the Highlands at the time of immigration. In fact, we know that the famous Flora MacDonald and her husband, Alan MacDonald of Kingsborough, they lost over 400 head of cattle in the year, I think it was 1769, if I'm not mistaken. And that almost drove them to bankruptcy. That was the main reason for their choosing to immigrate. So a lot of motivations like that, which forced people in some ways to consider immigration. Mm-hmm. And so, the 1730s, a big year there. You got the establishment of these 3 settlements. The one in New York ended up, a lot of those folks remained loyal during the Revolutionary War and left that settlement to go up into Ontario. A few folks that did not follow that politic remained there. They're still descendants of that there, but not nearly as large as was here in Carolina. The same thing with the Georgia settlement. A lot of those folks simply removed. A lot of them came into Charleston and moved out to other places as the colony became established, whereas the one here in North Carolina, we've got roughly 100-year period of immigration here, running from 1739, again picking up, let's say, around the late 1750s, 60s, up until the Revolutionary War, picking up once again after the Treaty of Paris, 1783. Again, large numbers coming around 1790 when sheep were introduced in a large fashion in Scotland. People began being displaced by sheep, though we can't really say that our people were cleared here in Carolina, much like the people that went to places like the Canadian Maritimes and others that actually had homes pulled down around them and that sort of thing. And off you go to the immigrant ship. You know, it was primarily a choice for our people, as opposed to actually being, sent off right up the gangplank to a ship that's waiting for you and your passage has been paid. You got to get out.
Yeah.
So those are some differences, and that's why the North Carolina settlement continued to thrive. And there were still efforts to bring those people in as late as the late 19th century. People like us, who better to take up the vacant lands after the Civil War, but people like us, and those efforts were made. So roughly 100-year period of immigration here.
Wow. That's something to really think about, all those factors, combining to, make you leave the place where you're from, your family, and, just kind of pick up. But yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of attachment, I think. There's a Gallic term, when someone would ask, where are you from? They might say, to where do you belong? And there's a sense of belonging, I think, that these people continue to feel. You find it evidenced to a great degree in tombstones in this area. When I say this area, I'm talking about the Highland settlements. I'm talking about what is really parts or all of 10 counties in North Carolina and parts of about 3 counties just across the line in South Carolina. So within this area, let's say if you roughly look at, I'm sure you probably got listeners who are going to know where Rayford is. Draw a 50-mile circle out from Rayford. That would sort of give you some definition of the settlement. That's going to take you north up into Lee County. That's going to take you west across the PD into the southern and southwestern part of Montgomery and the eastern part of Anson. It's going to take you down through central Robeson County and even into western Bladen County. So if you get an idea of where we're looking at there, that was the beachhead, and it continued to expand as more people came in. But the tombstones sort of tell the story, because a lot of these tombstones, you'll find that people would note, at least some of the later ones, and when I say later ones, obviously we're in an area that doesn't have a lot of stones, so there's a lot of wooden planks and places like Fort Bragg and all that are, just poignant testimonies 200 years later of someone, that made that journey. But tombstones here would give not only a person's name. Let me give, for example, one that's here very close to me in my community here. Duncan McLaurin of Ballachulish, Appin, Argyll, who immigrated to North Carolina in 1790. That's telling you not only exactly where I'm from, within, when you're talking about the place Ballachulish, the parish of Appin, the county of Argyll, that's like giving you a township and a crossroads community here in the Carolinas. Somebody could visit there and within eyesight, almost gonna certainly see lands that person tromped on. But to put that on a tombstone, I think says a lot, because there continued to be that sense of belonging. All right, I'm here now, but I belong to someplace else. And I think that's something that these people wanted future generations to know, was that sense of belonging, which is very almost peculiarly Highland. If we look at the other large ethnic groups in North Carolina, let's look at the Germans, the Moravians in the Piedmont. I'm not an expert, but I haven't seen that sort of thing on those sorts of stones. You don't see it in the Ulster stones that we find throughout the Piedmont. You don't see them in the Swiss or the French or, other people unless there's someone of some note. But here, common people want you to know, I came from here, I belong to there. So that was in their heart.
That was very, I'm sorry.
And,
That was very clannish, wasn't it? That speaks to how close they were in their clans.
Well, yeah. I mean, families like that. You can still in parts of this region, up until recent times, and I know using my own locale here as an example, the area that's sort of Laurinburg proper was settled primarily by some people that came around 1790, 91 from the area of Appin. And those are names that are very common Appin names, which aren't found quite as commonly in other places. That's names like McLaurin. That's names like Carmichael. That's names like McCall, McInnes. Any number of names there that are peculiar to the area. Right? So you can sort of tell in some places where the people came from by the surnames you find there. If I had to go just a few miles east into Robinson County, you'd look and you'd find names like McDonald and McCrae and McQueen, Skye names. Skye people settled here. You can go further up into other places and you can find names like, let's say, Macmillan and Blue and names like that. Those are Kintyre names or Kintyre Peninsula names. So you can almost, until living memory here, you can almost define communities here by the people that you found within them. And that's, a point that almost makes me think that, you wish that some of the folklore collectors had really paid more attention to this area, because there's a great deal to have been collected if those lorists and collectors, the people like Cecil Sharp and Maude Carpels and Margaret Fay Shaw, who did it in Scotland, but could have just as well done it here. If they'd been here in the 1920s or before, or the 30s even maybe, there's all sorts of things that they could have collected that are gone now. Gaelic song maybe, Gaelic speech, other foodways, lore, stories, that sort of thing that might have survived.
Let's kind of tie this in with Outlander right now a little bit.
Okay.
We've talked about the Ulster Scots. They would have come down through the Piedmont from up north, from Pennsylvania, in that area, right? Mm-hmm. The Highlanders would have come in through Wilmington or Charleston.
Yes. Primarily through the Cape Fear, through either the entry port of Brunswick, or after it was burned into Fayetteville, Wilmington. Now that change of just a few miles up the river from Brunswick to Wilmington shortened that passage inland by, some say, maybe as much as 10 days, because the rough, swampy land that one had to negotiate to get to Wilmington, to get onto the short shallow draft barges that were poled up the river to Fayetteville, to the final port of disembarkation.
Right.
So yeah, that was the primary port. Occasionally there are some folks. In fact, I know of some locally who say, right, my immigrant ancestors came in through Charleston. People weren't coming in large numbers to the South Carolina ports directly from Scotland. It was specifically here to North Carolina, but we do have some cases of where, let's say your ship is blown off course, you got a hurricane approaching, something like that. There are numbers of them that came in and then either by water made their way to Georgetown and up the PD and its tributaries, or sailed all the way back up to Wilmington to get in and made their way to associate with this community. So yeah, there are a few instances of that.
Right, and that makes me think about the hurricane that blew Jamie and Claire into Georgia.
Exactly.
There, and then they made their way up. But let me ask you this question. Did most of the Highland Scots make their home along the Cape Fear River, like we see in Outlander with Auntie Jocasta? Was that where they basically stayed? And did they go any further? I mean, it wouldn't have been typical for them to go up into the mountains. Is that?
You're getting into to my main sticking point about the whole story here. But yeah, exactly. Those 1739ers, the first party of 350, settled primarily on the waters above the headwater of the point of entry, Campbelltown. So you've got that settlement that's into what's sort of northern Cumberland County, edging into Harnett County, that area. So yes, they settled primarily on those tributaries. You know, you're going to have not only your possible path of transportation if you're going by maybe some sort of barge or canoe or whatever, as well as negotiate through the swamps, which even exist there. But yes, primarily upon those bodies of water. And we have that with the later comers as well. You get these folks that are settling first among the tributaries to the Cape Fear. Now, by the coming of the Revolutionary War, when we've got by this time several thousand of these people here, those lands are starting to become congested. So you have people that are going further west, and further south now into, if I look into the tributaries, you've got the Cape Fear, obviously the big one, but then you go into Drowning Creek, which is the headwater of the Lumber River Basin, rises up in sort of northwestern Moore County, comes down into, or western Moore County, if I get my geography correct there, and flows all the way down through Moore into Scotland. Robinson, becomes a navigable waterway to some degree, at least for small trade purposes. So the Cape Fear was filled up first. And then you start seeing people filling into the upper tributaries of the east bank of the PD and onto the tributaries of the Lumber River Basin, i.e. Drowning Creek and the Lumber River itself. So we look at the 1739ers, Cumberland, that area sort of between Fayetteville and Wade and west to south of Lillington, that area. Later comers, for example, is a very large and somewhat prominent Highland settlement, some prominent people, at least historically speaking, that settled in the area where Flora and Alan MacDonald of Kingsborough settled, which is actually southeastern Montgomery County. So in the area not very far from Mount Gilead, and that was the home of some very prominent people in Highland history, people that had important parts to play in the 45 and things like that. You get to, again, the east bank of the PD and coming down further south into areas that became populated once those northernmost areas were sort of full of people. That's why the area that I'm in here in Scotland County was very late in being settled, comparatively speaking. 1739, 1770 versus 1790-ish, when the settlers came in to populate the tributaries of Drowning Creek, the Lumber River, and this area here that I'm in the southern part of the settlement. So yeah, you're looking to fill in around the waterways. You need them for your mills, for your transportation, for So yes, that is the way it's sort of filled in. Now, to get back to the Outlander theme there, this community was somewhat well defined. And when I say well defined, I'm speaking of not only the surnames that you find in, let's say, communities, regions, all right? But also defined by the Presbyterian churches that were founded within them. So if you're looking pre-1800 in this region, you can sort of define the settlement not only by the names you find in places by that time, but by the Presbyterian congregations that have been established at that time as well. So that's two things that sort of give you markers there. Were there people that may have ventured out on their own? Sure, could have been. But I think the remarkable thing about this settlement, and my one main historical disagreement with the story of Outlander, is that why weren't they here among this settlement with everyone else? Because they remained here. Most of these, we still have people here in Scotland County. I can think of a couple of the families that were part of that 1790 migration from Appin that are still living on family land grants. They were to a great degree static. Now, all right, let's say you have somebody that's misbehaved in the church or made a fool of themselves in the community, whatever, off they go, they might make out on their own. But the remarkable thing is that this community remained to a great degree static until the early 19th century, for the most part. And that's when you have, again, this congestion of lands. You've got second, third born children who are not inheriting what has been left as a legacy to them. And you've also got the fact that by the 1820s or so, you've got these southwestern lands opening up, particularly with Andrew Jackson and the defeat of the native populations into Alabama, South Georgia, places like that. And by the 1810s and 20s, you actually have out migrations of people, primarily moving as groups of families from within church congregations that will go together. And they're going down into South Georgia, into Alabama by the 1830s, into Mississippi by the late 1830s. And you got people named Angus and Flora, who are there. There's a few of the churches established there in the 1830s and 40s that were bilingual, just as ours were here. So you got this sort of the beachhead has now moved out. It's D-Day plus 70 years, and they're moving out further, and really a great majority of the people with Highland Scots surnames in the Mid-South and even as west as Texas can probably trace their Highland ancestors back all the way to this settlement and back out the Cape Fear, back across the water to Scotland. So yes, you may have had this occasional person that ventured out, but you've got this definition of this community. Were me as a historian, I would have loved to have seen the story develop here within the true Highland settlement. I'm sure there's a lot of romance about the pioneer that ventures out on his own and all that, and that may have been Diana's, intent there, but it's really, really atypical. It's really atypical of the way these people behaved and moved.
Right. Well, and she said that she's taken, artistic license with things, and I'm sure, I think, I live in the mountains, and Carolyn does, and we're both very, the mountains is just this wonderful place to be. So I can see for Diana as an author wanting to get Jamie and Claire up to this high country where everything a little bit closer to God, right, Bill?
Well, that you mentioned that, because if someone was to go to the home site, it has been determined, a lot of romance and a lot of misinformation, but the home site of Flora and Alan MacDonald has been confirmed. We know exactly where it was. There's remnants of things there. I won't elaborate.
Right.
But if you're there in the Awaris, in the Awari National Forest, not that different, and I would have rather seen myself, somebody like that, in a place where they truly were, but that's me.
Right. I'm sure Diana will not hold it against you, Bill.
I hope so. I hope I have the pleasure of meeting her someday, because
and we won't either, even though we love Fraser's Ridge.
all right, very good, very good, very good. Well, if I might dovetail on that a little bit, just briefly, a lot of people think that because the Grandfather Mountain Highland Games are held in the mountains, the foothill of the Grandfather or at the foot of Grandfather Mountain, oh, there were Scots here. No. They happened to be what was it, third generation Scot, I guess, third, fourth generation, if I'm counting my genealogies correctly there, who actually purchased that land. And that site of McCrae Meadow was actually settled by one of the 1884 immigrants that I did my MA thesis on, who had first relocated unsuccessfully as a farmer to Robeson County, and was met by the Hugh McCrae family in Wilmington and encouraged to come up to this lovely place that'll be like Scotland for you. And that site was the home of a man named Alexander McCrae. He was a Highland man from Glenelg. He was a piper and a fisherman, but he is the only Highlander, that settled anywhere near the site of the present-day Grandfather Mountain Highland Games. They were all down here in the Sandhills.
Right. Do you think the draw was because the mountains did remind them so much of Scotland?
Well, that's sort of the romantic story among the family members who I interviewed and all. Yeah, but they were looking for someone who was, this man had come in as a fisherman, enticed over under false premises to come to North Carolina. Most of his friends and fellow countrymen went back home afterwards, but he stayed. And the story goes he was supposedly met the family of Hugh McCrae when he was busking on the bagpipes in downtown Wilmington. They thought it was great, and they got to know him, and let's take you up there, and it'll be great for you. And the family thrived there for a number of years. And so, yeah, the romance maybe of being like that, but one of the big things we think about when we look at our mountains, and we actually look at our sandhills. I'm sure a lot of your viewers may have visited Scotland, visited the Highlands.
Oh yeah.
How many trees they got there? Certainly a lot of reforestation, more forest in the 18th century than there were now. But one of the biggest contrasts that visiting Highland people have when they come to visit me here for programs at St. Andrews or the Games or something like that. Wow, the trees. And we think about here's people that were used to somewhat barren landscapes. They were used to water being nearby, large bodies of water, not just a little creek or a swamp, but water you could sail in, water you could fish in. And here they're thrown into what, for all accounts for them, would be equal to Tarzan's jungle. They didn't have the knowledge of working in wood. A common person living in the Highlands at that time, if they wanted to get a piece of driftwood that had washed ashore on their holding and use it for something, they would have to ask the tacksman or laird's permission to use it. Otherwise, it belonged to him. So you got people that are chopping down wood that have never probably chopped a tree before. They don't have stone to build with, or they're missing that. Just huge contrast in work skills and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at our little questionnaire here, Beth. I think that we've already kind of addressed the third one down. Did we, how about the second one we had?
Let's go, let's see. Well, Bill, as we're talking about, the Scots immigrating here, what are the kinds of things that they would have brought with them, or do we have any artifacts today from their immigration here?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that, Beth, because I took the liberty to take a few items out of my display cases here today to share with your viewers.
Yay!
And the first thing I want to show you is this. This is a creamware platter. And this is one of two known artifacts that we have documented and know that came over with the first 1739 immigrants, the Argyll colony. This platter was in the family of a woman called Jenny Von McNeil, B-H-A-N, the Gaelic word Jenny Von, dark Jenny, or Jeanette McNeil, who was sort of an overshadowed figure as far as women's history goes, because she was famed as a great claimer of land, a surveyor, a female cattle drover.
Wow.
It's one of these figures that has a great story that sort of got overshadowed by the Flora romance. But nonetheless, that's one of two things that we know
Now,
came over with that family.
where did that come from her? How did you get?
That came from descendants that left it with us. And it is documented, has been examined, and yeah, everything adds up. It's certainly a 1720s, 30s vintage item there.
And it's all in one piece. It's all in one piece.
Yeah, there was a small break at one point that has very nicely been repaired.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, the fact that it's even around now.
Oh, yeah.
It's
remarkable.
300. It's almost 300 years old, right?
Yeah, exactly. Now, this one, I'm going to show everybody here. I'll try to bring it up close. This is a shepherd's crook or a walking stick. It's been very common for people that might have had livestock or tending cattle, particularly, would have had a stick like this. You know, any man that, you look around the pictures of the men at cattle fairs and all, they either got the stick to sort of prod the cattle on with. This was brought by a man named Duncan McCormick, who was an immigrant from Appin in 1790. Small items like this that have been passed down through families for years. I think one of the most interesting ones is this item, and this was gifted by a descendant of a man that came from someplace in Argyll. Could have come from Appin. We're not exactly certain, but nonetheless, as you see this, it is a coconut.
Oh my gosh!
That has been polished and finished smooth. It is mounted with German silver. And as you might be able to see, I hope through the camera, the initials D MacL is on it.
See that?
And it's got a hand spun little handle on it. Now, when I first received this, I thought, well, gee, that's sort of a peculiar little thing. But it's worthy of showing, and I often question, why in the world would somebody give the trouble of finishing down a coconut shell and mounting it with German silver?
Yeah.
All right.
That is amazing. Why?
But I had this in my display case. Item comes from Duncan McLaurin, possibly Duncan McLaurin, Ballachulish, whatever. Man came in one day for one of our annual Scottish Heritage Symposia, who was at that time the director of modern collections at the National Museum of Scotland. And he sort of looks casually over at my display and says, "Oh, you've got a coconut charm." And I'm like, "Do what?" A coconut charm. Now, this would be sort of interesting in a story such as this, such as the Outlander story, all right? Think of where the Gulf Stream takes things from the Carolinas, from the East Coast, west across the water, and it finishes up on the west coast of Scotland. Now, it was not uncommon for items that had washed overboard, items that had been lost in sunken ships, to wash up on the west coast of Scotland. When I first saw this, I thought, well, that's an interesting documentation of maybe the relevance of trade between the Carolinas and the West Indies.
Mm-hmm.
But this man says, no. It said there's a little tradition in Argyll. Coconuts would sometimes wash up, and it was a lucky charm.
Oh.
You would save it, and you would treasure it. And so why else would you mount it in German silver?
Yeah.
And that answered the whole question. This wasn't a coconut that came off of, well, it could have been a coconut that came off a tree someplace in the West Indies or the Caribbean, but somehow it washed up on the west coast of Scotland, and this man brought it over.
Wouldn't you love to know the history of that?
Oh, exactly. Where it's been, the places it's been. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Traversed the Atlantic Ocean twice, most likely.
Oh,
right?
That's amazing.
It is cool.
One of the small things that you'll find is oftentimes, I've been here in the Sandhills for over 30 years now, and I think the most common immigrant artifact that I find are Gaelic Bibles.
Mm.
So here's one that has been rebound very primitively, as you might imagine there, with a deer skin or cow skin there. And this one happens to have a good deal of writing in it. And we find in this where the man says that he is a native of Colonsay, and he has purchased this book in Fayetteville. All right. Now it's interesting. I must have seen 50 Gaelic Bibles since I've been in this region. I've not seen a single one that had any Gaelic written in it, which I think is an interesting point, because we know that well, Gaelic was an oral language. You know, things were passed down word of mouth. Your histories, your genealogies, your poetry, things like that were passed down orally. We know that there were certainly literate Gaels, but I would tend to think that perhaps your bilingual Gael, or say either an immigrant or a first generation, may have been supplied a Bible, or in this case, a New Testament. You know, the Old Testament wasn't printed until 1801. You didn't have full Bibles until the 19th century, really, you know? So I would tend to think maybe that this was sort of a charm, a thing that someone took along with them to church.
Mm.
This is important to me. This means home to me. This is the Bible to me. I'm a Gael. I can speak fluently in Gaelic. Kimmerda Hashiv. I kind of read a word. I mean, just, you know, a thought like that. You know, perhaps there were illiterate Gaels. Well, we know that's probably the case. But I tend to wonder, simply because you haven't seen the writing in them.
Now, how old do you think that Bible is?
This one is a 1787
Wow.
Bible, and a lot of these were distributed by the British Foreign Bible Societies and things like that, as well as perhaps bought over. We know that around the turn of the 19th century, there were stores in Fayetteville that were advertising that they were selling Gaelic Bibles as well as German Bibles,
Okay.
because the trade going from the Moravian settlements and all down the Yadkin Road and the Morganton Road, you know, it's a
Right.
center of trade. One of the most unusual, but I think very interesting, very rare things is a psalm book. Now, this psalm book is what would have been used in the churches for singing psalms.
Mm.
You know, we didn't have Amazing Grace, How Sweet the Sound, How Firm a Foundation, things like that. You know, in the churches of that era, the only music that you had was the a cappella sung songs. You know, you might have a presenter that's lining out the hymns and everyone joining back in. In fact, I would challenge any of your listeners and viewers to maybe look up Gaelic psalm singing on YouTube. And you can imagine, by listening to that, what the sounds might have been at Barbecue or Bluff, or, you know, any of these older churches we have in this area, at least certainly through the mid 19th century. But that's what the music would have been. And so the metrical psalms, they were put in the meter. Instead of the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me down to lie. You know, the Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want. He makes me down to lie. Put into meter. Okay? Where the presenter, the strong male voice of the community, would sit at a desk in front of the pastor, in front of the minister. I don't say pastor, that's a Baptist thing. Minister, or mister, as they would say in the Presbyterian church. They would sit in front of Mr. McKeever, Mr. Lindsay, Mr. McDermott, whatever. And when it's time to sing the psalm, the man would stand up. The Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want, in Gaelic. Everybody responds, the Lord's my shepherd. You know, that sort of call and response sort of thing. The interesting thing about this one is it has the tunes in it.
Oh.
So, and interestingly enough, the titles of the tunes are given in English. Tunes such as Newton, St. Anne's, St. Paul's, St. David's. You know, you can look in present day Coleshill. You know, you can look into present day hymn books, the hymn tune Dundee. You know, you can look in present day hymnals and you can find these melodies. And these are the melodies that were the ones that were used to sing the psalms.
So there's actually the notes. Have you tried
Oh, yeah.
to print those out, Bill?
You know, this is yes and no. I mean, it is giving the notes there, but most of these tunes I know in my own head. You know, different keys. This is written out pretty much just in the key of C for everything. You know, and bagpipes, we don't do C. So. And then finally, the items that I think will be important to everyone. Flora MacDonald was sort of evidence and an example of the tacksman class, that upper middle class, the lieutenants, the chiefs who came over, people of means. This is a silver sauce boat that was in the Kingsborough family. I don't know that you'll be able to see on camera, but there is a MacDonald crest on this. The hallmarks tell us it's from Edinburgh. The dates all are correct for us here. This is a piece of the family silver from the MacDonalds of Kingsborough.
So we think Flora may have had that.
Oh, we're most certain of that. We're most certain of that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
most certain of that.
That's so cool.
This is the snuff box that Alan gave to Flora on their marriage on November 6th, 1850 at Armadale House in the island of Skye.
Jamie gave Claire pearls and Alan gave Flora a snuff box.
That's right. That's right. You know, it's sort of interesting, you know, she, you know, snuff was a female thing as well as a male thing then, you know, and there's been written some romantic stories about Flora MacDonald smoking the pipe up in Cameron's Hill as she was contemplating and waiting on husband Alan to come back from the venture on which they purchased the plantation, which they eventually located on. So yeah, tobacco use, you know, a big thing.
Yeah.
And that's actually what brought a lot of Scots to, in fact, early Scots. Somebody had asked later about Maryland and places like that, Maryland, Virginia. A lot of Scots were involved, not only as indentures, but early Jacobite prisoners from the earlier Jacobite wars, from the Cromwellian wars, prisoners that were sent to Virginia, to Maryland, to the West Indies, to Barbados, to work in the plantations. In the West Indies, it would have been sugar. In Maryland and Virginia, obviously tobacco.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And North
But I
Carolina.
digress briefly. And finally, this is a very small seed pearl brooch.
Pull it back just a little bit, Bill. Okay.
Back there, all right?
Yeah.
And as you might see, I'll come up a little bit closer so you can see the small pearls. And you see there is a lot of light colored hair and a lot of dark colored hair.
Mhm.
And at some point, this ought to really be turned over to a master jeweler in a museum, because DNA tests could be done to prove this, that it supposedly contains a lot of Flora's hair and the prince's hair.
Oh my, really?
Yes.
You don't want to give that up, do you?
No. This is, you know, surprisingly, you know, we think about buildings and facilities and things like that here on our university campus, but I've actually got some of what are probably the most valuable artifacts, some of our most valuable property in
Now,
display
are
cases
those
here.
artifacts, are they on display in the museum there?
They are on display here at the center, yes.
Okay.
And in fact, some of these artifacts came through descendants of Flora. Flora's second great grandson actually came back from New Zealand to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where he became a executive of Pittsburgh Steel. He became very active and involved with the Scottish community, forming the Clan Donald in the United States, and then his son eventually came south, retired, and lived in Southern Pines. Somerled MacDonald retired and passed away in Southern Pines, just miles away from his third great grandmother Flora's homestead, and the fourth generation still living here in the Southeast. So
Yeah.
who holds the title of Kingsborough?
Yeah, I love it. Well, Bill, I think we finished up for today. We
Oh,
are
really? Okay.
anywhere close to being finished, are we, Carolyn?
No.
we're gonna schedule another time with you to get the rest of these questions answered. I'm so excited. Our listeners, the viewers, our Facebook group members, they're gonna love this. This is just,
Oh yeah. And
yeah.
we have a lot from them we haven't even gotten to yet. So yeah.
Yeah, they ask questions, and all we've done is ask our own. So
well, and I've probably talked too much, but
No.
it's something I'm passionate about, and I love passing along. And it's just been a pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah, and we'll get back. Just in the meantime, let people know how they can visit the Scottish Heritage Center.
Okay, we are located on the St. Andrews University campus here in Laurinburg, and we are not saying that we are free, completely doors open 100% right now to everyone. If you would like to make an appointment, you can get in touch with me. Personally, I will take folks on appointment that may be interested in doing research in my collections or looking at the displays. Beth, maybe, and Carolyn will maybe talk about how we can get that information out.
Yeah. Okay.
In a controlled fashion there.
Okay.
But no, I would certainly welcome that. I am sort of a one-man show, so I do sort of request that folks try to make an appointment. Otherwise, I don't want people driving a great distance and me be out playing the bagpipe for something, you know. So,
Yeah.
because it happens a lot.
Maybe the next time you need to play the bagpipes for us.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea.
Well, we can think about that at some point. I like wearing the historian hat sometimes as opposed to just a bagpipe player hat. So
Well, it's been great, and we're looking forward to the next time. We're going to eventually get through all of these questions. It's probably going to be so many more once this first video goes out.
lovely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but Bill, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we'll let our listeners and viewers know when they can catch the next part 2 of this.
Very good.
Yeah,
I'll look very forward to it.
it's kind of like
a-
Outlander facts and myths and facts or something like that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Be happy
And thank
to.
you for bringing items on display too. That was wonderful to see those.
Well, some things that your folks might not see, and I think things which really document the whole experience here, because there's not a lot of large items. You know, it's just small items, and some things that might be forgotten in Granny's attic someplace. You know.
Yeah. Oh wow.
We actually had a huge discovery. If I might give me just one moment, we had a huge discovery here in Scotland County just a few weeks ago of a 1760 edition of Jacobite poetry, which was discovered in just part of an estate. The first edition came out in 1751 and was confiscated primarily by the government because it was supposedly seditious. These are Gaelic poems written in Gaelic, printed in Gaelic, about the government and things that are wrong, and we miss the old ways, things like that. 1760 edition surfaced here, again, sort of rebound and recovered in buckskin and leather, things like this. Extremely rare piece. I had professors at Edinburgh University who were fumbling over at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. of their morning, trying to compare and contrast editions of this thing.
Right.
There's still things out there to be found.
I know.
Yeah. Awesome.
You know, just like you said, in somebody's attic, you know, that's been passed down to them, that they don't even realize the importance or significance of it. So, but Bill, thank you so much. We certainly appreciate you talking with us tonight, and we're going to get back for part 2 and probably part 3 and part 4. Who knows?
Well, you'll mute me and gag me before that, but I'll look forward to it too, for sure.
Thanks so much, Bill.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
Pleasure. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.